Italy, of which Napoleon was king, also enjoyed her share of his magnificent improvements. He cut fine roads across the Alps and the Apennines, established a maritime arsenal at Genoa, fortified Corfu so as to make that island the key of Greece, repaired and enlarged the port of Venice, and while the works were proceeding, it was rendered capable of admitting French ships to the line by means of the floating buoys used in Holland to obviate the risk of the ship being attacked by the enemy during this hazardous conveyance. A plan was proposed by which they were to be enabled to carry their own guns, and it was, I believe, successfully adopted. Napoleon, moreover, intended to establish a naval arsenal at Ragusa, another at Pola in Istria, and a third at Ancona. He conceived the happy and bold idea of forming a junction between the Gulfs of Venice and Genoa by the help of the Po and a canal extending from Alessandria to Savona through the Apennine. This plan would have been attended with the most important results, for independently of its immense commercial and military advantages, it would have established a direct and safe communication between Venice and Toulon, and the latter port would thus have received all the naval productions of the Adriatic free from any chance of their being attacked by the enemy. Finally, Napoleon cleared Rome of the rubbish with which she was encumbered, restored many ancient vestiges of the Romans, and formed the design of draining the Pontine marshes. I here subjoin the preamble of the report on the state of the empire presented to the legislative body in the sitting of the 25th of February, 1813, by the Count Montalivet, Minister of the Interior. This superb report, which is founded in all its points on authentic documents, is calculated to afford a just idea of the wonders of Napoleon's government. I think I may properly close the present subject by inserting an official statement of the expenses in public works during the memorable reign of the Emperor. Gentlemen, His Majesty has directed me to make you acquainted with the situations of the interior of the empire during the years 1811 and 1812. You will have the satisfaction to observe that notwithstanding the great armies which the state of war, both maritime and continental, has rendered indispensably necessary, the population has continued to increase, that French industry has made new progress, that the soil was never better cultivated, or our manufactures more flourishing, and that at no period of our history has wealth been more equally diffused among all classes of society. The farmer now enjoys benefits to which he was formerly a stranger. He is enabled to purchase land at the highest price. His food and clothing are better and more abundant than before, and his dwelling is more substantial and convenient. Improvements in agriculture, manufactures, and the useful arts are no longer rejected merely because they are new. Experiments are made in every branch of labor, and the methods that prove to be most advantageous are substituted for old ones. Artificial meadows are multiplied. The system of fallow lands is abandoned. Routines are better understood, and improved plans of cultivation augment the produce of the soil. Cattle are multiplied, and the different breeds improved. Even the poor laborer finds means to purchase at a high price Spanish rams and stallions of the finest breed. They are now sufficiently enlightened to know their real interests, and they do not scruple to make these valuable purchases. Thus, the demands of our manufacturers, our agriculturists, and our armies are every day better supplied. This high degree of prosperity is to be attributed to the liberal laws by which this great empire is ruled, and to the suppression of feudalism, tithes, mortmains, and monastic orders, measures which have created or set at liberty numerous private estates which are now the free patrimony of a multitude of families formerly mere paupers. It is also to be ascribed to the more equal division of wealth, to the clearness and simplification of the laws relative to landed property and mortgages, and to the promptitude observed in the decision of lawsuits, which are now daily decreasing in number. To these same causes and to the influence of vaccination must be attributed the increase of the population. It may even be said that the conscription, which annually enrolls under our banner the flower of the French youth, has had some share in contributing to this increase by multiplying the number of marriages, because marriage fixes forever the fate of the young Frenchman who has once served in obedience to the law. The third, the emperor still continued to seclude himself like a hermit. Towards evening he sent for me, and he informed me that he was somewhat relieved of his toothache, though he was not better in other respects. He said he felt extremely weak and depressed in spirits, and that during the whole day his mind had been possessed with gloomy ideas. He was taking a bath, and after a few moments' silence, he said, as if making an effort to rouse himself, "Come, my dear Zara, if you are not too drowsy, tell me one of your stories. It is long since you have told me anything about your friends of the Faubourg Saint-Germain." "Sire," I replied, "I have related so much in that subject that I fancy I've exhausted my whole stock of tales, whether true or false. Only the scandalous stories now remain untold, and in these your majesty knows that you yourself were never spared. However, a droll anecdote just now occurs to me. One day, Monsieur de T, on leaving home to attend to his ministerial duties, informed his wife that he should bring back Monsieur Denon with him to dinner. He wished the distinguished traveler to be treated with the utmost attention, and he told Madame de T that the best thing she could do would be to look over his work, so that she might be enabled to pay some handsome compliments to the author. At the same time informing her in what particular part of the library the book was to be found. Madame de T set about her task. She found the book exceedingly interesting, and was delighted at the thought of speedily being introduced to the hero. No sooner were the company seated at table than she informed Monsieur Denon, whom she had taken care to place beside her, that she had been reading his work, and that she had been very much pleased with it. Monsieur Denon bowed, and the lady proceeded to remark on the singular countries he had visited and the hardships he had endured, at the same time taking pains to assure him how deeply she sympathized in his troubles. Monsieur Denon bowed again, and all went on very smoothly until Madame de T, still addressing herself to Monsieur Denon, declared how very much delighted she had been when she found his man Friday, and made him the companion of his solitude. On hearing this, Monsieur Denon started, and turning to the person who sat on his other hand, he said, "Is it possible she takes me for Robinson Crusoe? The fact is, or I should more properly say, as the story goes, poor Madame de T had been reading the adventures of Robinson Crusoe instead of Denon's travels in Egypt." The emperor laughed heartily, and afterwards several times related the anecdote himself. The conversation turned on the inventive malignity of Parisian society and the fine story that was got up about the cabinet maker who awkwardly discovered to be the concealed drawer of a bureau which happened to contain many secrets connecting with his own family. The violent anger of B against Ventre de Biche, the sympathy expressed for him by Madame de V, and the singular consolation she afforded him all were described. The emperor was much amused by these details, most of which were new to him, and he expressed his belief that the story was not entirely an invention. He once more repeated his censure of the saloons of Paris, which he said might truly be styled the infernal regions. He observed that they kept up a constant system of slander and calumny, and that therefore they might with justice have engaged the constant attention of all the tribunals of correctional police in the capital. The emperor had now become animated, and he conversed for a considerable time. He happened to mention an officer whom he said he had not treated very well, and I ventured to observe that I believed he had notwithstanding been aide de camp to a distinguished general. "What signifies that?" resumed the emperor. "Don't you know," continued he, smiling, "that a general frequently has two aides de camp, one for the field and one for the household?" He said a great deal respecting the national ineptitude of the French to close a revolution or to adhere to any fixed order of things, and he alluded to the celebrated affair of Malay, which he jokingly said might be called a miniature or a caricature of his own return from the Isle of Elba. Malay's absurd plot, said he, might have been truly regarded as a hoax. A prisoner of state, an obscure individual, effected his own liberation and in his turn imprisoned the prefect and even the minister of police, those keepers of dungeons and detectors of plots who suffered themselves to be caught in the snare like so many sheep. A prefect of Paris, the board sponsor of his department, and, moreover, a very devoted subject, readily lent himself to every plan for assembling a government that had no existence. Ministers appointed by the conspirators were engaged in making their round of visits when those who nominated them were again safely lodged in prison. Finally, the inhabitants of the capital learned in the morning the sort of political debauch that had taken place during the night without having been in the least disturbed by it. Such an extravagant attempt, said the emperor, could never have produced any result. Even had it succeeded, it must have fallen of itself in the space of a few hours, and the victorious conspirators would have thought only of escaping from amidst their success. I was therefore far less incensed at the attempt of the criminal than at the facility with which those who appeared most attached to me had been prevailed on to become his accomplices. On my arrival, each candidly related to me the details that concerned himself and which served to incriminate all. They frankly avowed that they had been caught and had for a moment placed full faith in my overthrow. They did not deny that in the delirium of the moment they had entered into the designs of the conspirators, and they rejoiced with me at their happy escape. Not one of them mentioned the slightest resistance or the least effort made to defend and perpetuate the existing government. This seems never to have entered their heads, so accustomed were they to changes and revolutions that all were perfectly resigned to the establishment of a new order of things. All therefore changed countenance and manifested the utmost embarrassment when, in a resolute tone of voice, I said, "Well, gentlemen, it appears you thought my reign at an end. To that I have nothing to say. But where were your oaths to the King of Rome? What became of your principles and doctrines? You make me tremble for the future. I found it necessary to make an example, were it only for the sake of putting weak men on their guard for the future." And judgment fell upon poor Frochot, the prefect of police, whom I'm sure loved me well, yet at the mere request of one of these mountebank conspirators, instead of the resistance which his duty required, instead of manifesting a firm determination to perish at his post rather than yield, he very contentedly issued orders for preparing a place for the sitting of the new government. "Indeed," said the emperor, "the readiness with which the French people accommodate themselves to change is calculated to prolong vicissitudes which no other nation but themselves could endure. Thus, individuals of every party seem to be well convinced that all is not yet settled, and Europe shares this opinion, which is founded no less on our natural inconstancy and volatility than on the massive events that have risen up during the last 30 years. The fourth, today the emperor would not receive anyone during the whole of the morning. He sent for me at the hour he had appointed for taking the bath, during which, and for some time after, he conversed on the knowledge of the ancients, the historians by which it has been transmitted to modern times, the connecting links formed by different writers. His reflections on this subject all led to the conclusion that the world was yet in its infancy, and human nature still more so. We then took a view of the structure of the globe, the irregularities of its surface, the unequal division of sea and land, the amount of its population, the scale by which that population was dispersed, the different political societies into which it was formed. I calculated that Europe contained 170 million of inhabitants. The emperor remarked that he himself had governed 80 million, and I added that after the alliance with Prussia, he had marched at the head of more than 100 million. The emperor then suddenly changed the conversation. He asked for my atlas, and while he looked over it, he several times remarked that it was truly an invaluable work for youth. Afterwards, when speaking of the wonders of his life and the vicissitudes of his fortune, the emperor remarked that he ought to have died at Moscow, because at that time his military glory had experienced no reverse, and his political career was unexampled in the history of the world. He then drew one of those rapid and animating pictures which he sketches off with so much facility, and which frequently rise to a degree of sublimity, observing that the countenance of one of the individuals who happened to be present was not exactly expressive of approbation. He said, "Isn't that your opinion? You do not think I ought to have closed my career at Moscow?" "No, sire," was the reply, "for in that case history would have been deprived of the return from Elba of the most generous and most heroic act that ever man performed, of the grandest and most sublime event that the world ever witnessed." "Well," returned the emperor, "there may be some truth in that, but what say you to Waterloo? Ought I not to have perished there? "Sire," said the person whom he addressed, "if I have obtained pardon from Moscow, I do not see why I should not ask it for Waterloo also. The future is beyond the will and the power of man. It is in the hands of God alone." At another time, the emperor spoke of the different members of his family, the little assistance he had received from them, the many embarrassments they had occasioned him. He particularly alluded to the mistaken notion that they had conceived that being once placed at the head of a people, they should become identified with them so as to prefer their interests to those of the common country. This idea, he said, might have originated in honorable feeling, but it was most erroneous and mischievous in its application. In their mistaken notions of independence, the members of his family sometimes seemed to consider their power as detached, forgetting that they were merely parts of a great whole, whose views and interests they should have aided instead of opposed. But after all, continued he, they were very young and inexperienced, and were surrounded by snares, flatterers, and intriguers, with secret and evil designs. Then, passing suddenly from their faults to their good qualities, he added, "And yet, if we judge from analogy, what family in similar circumstances would have acted better? Everyone is not qualified to be a statesman. That requires a combination of powers. It does not often fall to the lot of one. In this respect, all my brothers were singularly situated. They possessed at once too much and too little talent. They felt themselves too strong to resign themselves blindly to a guiding counselor, and yet too weak to be left entirely to themselves. But take them all in all, I have certainly good reason to be proud of my family. Joseph would have been an ornament to society in any country, and Lucien would have been an honor to any political assembly. Jerome, as he advanced in life, would have developed every qualification requisite in a sovereign. Louis would have been distinguished in any rank or condition in life. My sister Lisa was endowed with masculine powers of mind. She must have proved herself a philosopher in her adverse fortune. Pauline, perhaps the most beautiful woman of her age, has been, and will continue to the end of her life, the most amiable creature in the world. As to my mother, she deserves all kind of veneration. How seldom is so numerous a family entitled to so much praise! Add to this that, setting aside the jarring of political opinions, we sincerely loved each other. For my part, I never ceased to cherish fraternal affection for them all, and I am convinced that in their hearts they felt the same sentiments towards me, and that in case of need they would have given me every proof of it. After dinner, the emperor received all his suite, and we remained with him for upwards of an hour. He was in bed, but he conversed with facility and was evidently better. We took leave of him with the hope of soon seeing him recovered. We remarked that he had not dined with us for the space of 12 days, and that without him our lives, our hours, our moments were deranged and devoid of interest. The 5th, the emperor continued confined to his room. He sent for me, as he had done for several days past, at the hour appointed for taking his bath. He was somewhat relieved by the soreness of his mouth, but he was still occasionally troubled with toothache. He resumed the conversation of the preceding day on the structure of the globe, for the emperor now evinced an absolute passion for geography. He took my map of the world and remarked on the irregular distribution of land and sea. He paused for a time on the continent of Asia, and from the vast Pacific Ocean passed to the more contracted limits of the Atlantic. He started many questions relative to the variable and the trade winds, the monsoons of the Indian Ocean, the calm of the Pacific, the hurricanes of the Antilles. And he found at the respective places on the map the physical and speculative solutions which science furnishes on these subjects. This pleased him exceedingly, and he continued his perusal of the map, making remarks as he went over it. Tables, said he, are of the highest use in assisting the mind to draw comparisons. They awaken in a sight ideas. You have fallen on an excellent plan in thus making your tables of history and geography embrace all the remarkable circumstances and phenomena connected with these sciences. The emperor wished to refer to some of the oldest books of travels and the works of the monk Rubricius and the Italian Marco Polo were brought to him. He glanced over them and remarked that they continued and contained no information and possessed no other merit than their old age. On leaving the bath, he proceeded to his bedchamber to see the grand bed that had been sent to him from London, and which had just been put up. It was surmounted by a sort of canopy, supported on 4 large posts so high that it was found necessary to cut the feet before it could be put up in the emperor's little bedchamber, which it almost filled. Besides, it had from some cause or other a very disagreeable smell that was altogether so bulky and unsteady that it suggested the idea of a tottering castle. The emperor said it was an absolute rat trap, but that he would take care not to be caught in it. He ordered it immediately to be removed, remarking that he did not wish to be troubled with such lumber. It was accordingly taken down, and the old camp bed was substituted in its place. The confusion and inconvenience occasioned by these changes put the emperor very much out of humor. In course of the day, I had a long conversation with an English seaman, an enthusiastic admirer of the emperor, who related to me several anecdotes which pleased me the more, as they were entirely new to me, but though not generally known, they are not the less true, for some of the facts the narrator had obtained from unquestionable authority, and to others he had himself been a witness. When I afterwards mentioned some of these particulars to the emperor, he immediately recollected them and acknowledged their correctness. However, my informant assured me that, to his great astonishment, these anecdotes had been but little circulated in England, and that there, as well as in France, whatever reflected honor on Napoleon or showed his character in an advantageous light was lost by that fatality to which I have so often alluded, for calumny and falsehood constantly overwhelmed all that was good beneath the massive evil that was invented. The following are some of the anecdotes to which I have just now alluded. We were treated, said my narrator, in the best manner possible at Verdun, the depot of the English prisoners of war. We enjoyed the same privileges as the inhabitants. Verdun is a very pleasant town, and we found provisions and wine exceedingly cheap. We were allowed to walk several miles beyond the town without the trouble of asking permission, and we could, if we pleased, obtain leave to absent ourselves for several days at a time. In short, we were so well protected against all sorts of vexations that the general under whose command we were placed, having been guilty of some irregularities in his treatment of us, was ordered to Paris by the special command of Napoleon, and from fear of the punishment that awaited him, he committed suicide. It once happened that we received orders to confine ourselves to our lodging, and we were informed that we should not be allowed to quit them for several days. The reason assigned for this measure was that the emperor intended to pass through Verdun, and that it was not thought safe to allow him to be surrounded by so many of the enemy's prisoners. Besides the disappointment of our curiosity, for we very much wished to see Napoleon, this order hurt us exceedingly. Do they distrust brave English seamen, we thought? Is it possible that they confuse and confound us with assassins? Be this as it would, we were doomed to be close prisoners. When on the day of Napoleon's arrival, we were, to our surprise, informed that we were again at liberty, and that the emperor very much disapproved of the order that had been given for our confinement. We eagerly thronged to see the emperor, and he passed by us unattended by any escort, with an air of perfect security, and even with an expression of kindness which quite delighted us. Our acclamations were no less sincere than those of the French themselves. Napoleon and Maria Louisa, returning from their journey in Holland, arrived at Givet on the Meuse, where several hundred were at that time assembled. A sudden storm arose. There was a heavy fall of rain. The river overflowed its banks, and the pontoon bridge was broken and rendered impassable. However, the emperor, anxious to continue his journey and not being in the habit of thinking anything impossible, resolved to cross the river at all hazards. All the boatmen in the neighborhood were collected together, but not one would attempt to cross. However, said Napoleon, I am determined to be on the other side of the river before noon. He immediately ordered some of the principal English prisoners to be brought to him. Are there many of you here, said he, and are there any sailors among you? There are 500 of us, and we are all seamen, was the reply. Well, I want to know whether you think it possible to cross the river, and whether you will undertake to convey me to the opposite bank. It was acknowledged to be a hazardous attempt, but some of our veterans undertook to accomplish it. Napoleon got into the boat with a degree of confidence that surprised us, and he reached the opposite bank in safety. He heartily thanked those who had rendered him this act of service, and ordered that they should be provided with new clothes. To this he added a pecuniary present, and granted them their liberty.